Okay, testing the audio again. Diego, can you log on to the YouTube stream and see if you can hear that? Testing the audio is okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. We think we have audio restored to the meeting. We're going to run the audio out of the laptop here. So, Mr. Chair, turn back over to you for the next couple of agenda items.
Miscellaneous. Item number 1, consideration recommendation of appointment of Casey Bradford to the position, human resource and
So for that route, I need to recommend the council appoint Casey Radke to the position of human resources manager.
we have a second.
This is Crow, I'll second.
No pro. Any discussion, comments?
Just to give you a little bit of background, after a recruitment process, recommend the hiring of Casey Radke to the HR manager position. Comes to the position very qualified and past experience working for the Hinesville in Jefferson County, and we're very excited to have her join our team.
Okay, all those in favor of the recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Just for the audio stream, reporting that was Hanairo who made the motion, seconded by Crow, a vote of 3-0.
All right. Finally, for budget 2026 kickoff presentation, this is part presented tonight by city staff. By Diego.
Oh, oh, sorry. I'm trying to listen to make sure that it doesn't cut off.
Yeah, just trying to get set up here. I believe we hopefully are showing the video for anyone connecting through the. There we go. Okay, so I'm sharing the screen for the presentation. Hopefully my audio is going through. I'll be giving a brief presentation on part 2 of our budget kickoff. A couple of meetings ago, we did part 1 of the budget kickoff, which looked at kind of the overall budget context. This is going to get into more specific information going through Vance here, an update on the state budget. Yes.
I'm showing.
I'm seeing it on the.
On YouTube?
Yep.
Yeah. Video sees it.
Okay.
Computer,
All right, so I will be providing an update on some of the state budget impacts, then looking at estimates of revenues and major expenditures, touching on our multi-year operating budget forecast, and then doing some high-level budget strategies to consider as we start work on the 2026 budget process. The biennial state budget was approved with bipartisan support and signed into law by Governor Evers on July 3rd, 2025. It was a very quick end to the budget process. There are several items that affect municipalities, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on several of these, but it did include additional funding for transportation and municipal aid, which I'll be talking about in a moment. It included additional funding for EMS training cost reimbursement to try to bring more people into the EMS profession. There's additional bonding authority for the Environmental Improvement Fund. And although the city of Middleton currently does not have any outstanding debt for our water and sewer utilities, that would provide an option if we wanted to look at a clean water fund in the future, if we needed to make larger capital improvements within our utilities. And then there were several changes to the Innovation Grant Program, and I think this was in response to relatively low utilization and some of the feedback about the program. So it does provide more flexibility. It has eliminated a requirement for 10% cost savings from a consolidation between municipalities. There are still some limits on the portion of the grant that can be used compared to the cost of the services. That requirement for a 10% reduction in cost has been replaced with a requirement that the combined cost cannot exceed 115% of the prior year cost. And it changed the minimum duration period for an agreement to 3 years. There are a number of questions about how this is going to be implemented in practice. The Department of Revenue that was getting ready to launch this program said that they will need to take some additional time to develop the rules and guidelines, and will provide additional updates on that as more information is available. Going into more detail on the revenue impacts, there were several items that will increase funding, which will impact the city of Middleton. For shared revenue, which is our largest general unrestricted aid, there is a 3.4% increase in funding. That increases for shared revenue are now tied to increases in sales tax revenue, and that is the estimated revenue for the first year of the biennium going into that program. There's a program called the Municipal Services Payments Program that provides assistance based on local costs to support state-owned property. For Middleton, that's a relatively small dollar amount. We have a UW Crop Innovation Center located in Middleton. We get a few $1,000s a year for that program, and the reimbursement rate has moved up from about 37% to 50%. Another large aid program for City of Middleton is our general transportation aids or road aids. There's an increase overall in funding for that program of 3% in each year of the biennium. And those aids are distributed based on a formula that looks at your overall costs that you've been spending on roads over the last 6 years. So we are expecting that we will see some increases both due to the additional spending that Middleton has been having for road projects and the additional funding from the program. For mass transit funding, there was an increase for what's called Tier C systems, which tends to be smaller communities and a lot of shared ride taxi services. And while there was not an increase directly in the tier that Middleton is in, which is considered Tier B, it's possible that there could be some additional funding for Tier B municipalities because there are some services based on population and census changes that'll be moving into Tier C, and that potentially could free up some funding in Tier B. More information to come on that. And then finally, there was an additional extension of the local road improvement program funding with $100 million of supplemental grants that are available for the 25-26 state budget year. So looking specifically at City of Middleton estimates, these are the unofficial estimates of what we're anticipating based on the action in the state budget. We'll be getting more specific information in the next couple of months. But overall, across all of those programs, we are looking at about an $81,000 increase in state aid funding in our general fund for next year. That translates to about a 2.4% increase. So the largest areas we're expecting increases are state road aids, followed by shared revenue. Expenditure Restraint Incentive Program aid is actually going to be dropping off, and that is because Middleton no longer qualifies that because our tax rate is too low, which seems like a very strange criteria to have for a program designed to encourage you to restrain your spending. But in order to qualify for that program, you have to have a mill rate of at least $5 per thousand, and we are now below that threshold. Looking at some of our other revenues in the general fund, our largest revenue is the general property tax levy, which represents about 60% of the total general fund revenue. That is limited by the property tax levy limit, and that changes based on the change in net new construction. We are estimating a 1.5% increase in net new construction, and therefore property tax levy, or about $230,000. We've done some overall estimates, looking at other various revenue sources. We've included the additional state aid funding, the roughly $81,000, charges for services, investment income, and overall across all of these sources, our best estimate today is about a $561,000 increase, which represents about 2.2% of the budget. So certainly significant dollars. However, the challenge that we're continuing to face is that when we look at the growth of inflation and the growth of the community and population, our cost to provide services are increasing faster than that 2.2%, which is what puts the constraint and makes a challenging budget situation. Just in interest of time, I'm not going to go into detail on a couple of these slides. I'm certainly able to answer questions if there are any at the end, and the information is in the handouts if it is useful for reference. There's a couple slides about property tax levy limit and the change in net new construction over time. I've included a slide that highlights the tax rate comparison for the cities and villages in Dane County. I think this is an important one to note because a lot of these communities have not changed their position significantly in the past years because we're all subject to levy limits. Middleton historically has had a relatively low municipal tax rate, and that continues to be the case due to the impact of levy limits. Of the communities on this chart, only City of Verona and Village of Windsor have a lower equalized tax rate for their city or village portion, and we're well below some of the peer communities in Dane County. One area that has been real positive for revenues in recent years has been investment income. We've been able to take advantage of higher interest rates. Looking back over the past 8 or so years, we had some years where interest rates, at least for the short-term end of the curve, were near zero. We've seen that increase significantly. Interest rates right now are generally in the 4 to 5% range for the terms that we're investing with. Where we've been able to with cash flow, we've been trying to lock in into some 3 to 5 year investments to take advantage of those rates. The question is budgeting for the future because there's a lot of talk about interest rates being cut in the future. We want to be somewhat conservative, and at this point, we are estimating $850,000 for the 2026 budget. That is about $500,000 lower than what we saw in 2024, but we want to be cautious and not add all of that in, have a turn in interest rates, and then have a gap in our budget. Turning to the expenditure estimates, I wanted to highlight several major projects and initiatives that are all underway that will have an impact on this and future budgets. The first is the compensation and classification study, looking at the non-union positions. Our consultants, Baker Tilly, have completed the market survey and done their initial position analysis. The next step will be to gather some additional information from department heads on the potential grade assignments and then look at recommendation options. And we're anticipating a preliminary report with some implementation options available in August or early September. The next item also will be done by Baker Tilly. Following the compensation and classification study will be the second part of that project, which is an organization and staffing study. And that will get started this late summer, fall, likely looking at some preliminary report information in early 2026. For collective bargaining agreements, both of the city's unions for the police officers and paramedics have agreements that run through 2025. We will be starting negotiations this fall, and that will be for new agreements starting in 2026. Next, our health insurance renewal. The city is in its first year with Group Health Cooperative. As part of moving to Group Health Cooperative, we do have rate caps in place for 2026 and 2027, and we're anticipating that we will get a renewal quote in September to see if we're at that cap or if we come in below that cap. And then finally is our ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning software project. That we have a consultant working on this project with us. They are doing a needs assessment. They'll be on site next week doing interviews with departments. We're anticipating that we'd be able to issue an RFP this fall and go through the selection process, hopefully have a vendor selected by the end of the year, then work through contract negotiations and start implementation in 2026. with the goal of going live in 2027. It's a major project, so we're making progress, but it will take some time to get through the rest of the project. On the personnel cost side, there are a lot of unknowns. At this point, the EMS and police contracts are to be determined, subject to negotiations. Non-union cost of living will be dependent on the recommendations from the compensation study and then decisions by this committee and council. Based on our current pay plan, we did look at where we would be for market adjustments based on an employee's position within grade. Those range between 2% if you're at the beginning end of the range, up to 0.25% if you're at or beyond the midpoint. That median increase is about 1.5%. So that's something we would plan on factoring in along with whatever recommendations come out of the compensation study. For health insurance, the renewal is forthcoming, but for planning purposes, we are using the rate cap of 7.9% as a worst case scenario for the health insurance renewal. Dental insurance, preliminary is looking at a 6% increase. We're trying to see if there's any opportunity to reduce that for this year, and we'll have more information as we get into the rest of the budget process. And we have some relatively minor changes in the WRS rates, a little higher for general employees, a little less for protective employees. So looking at total dollars for the general fund, as a starting point, we're looking at a personnel contingency for a lot of those unknowns of $415,000. That is before any information coming from the compensation study, and that is based on what we're seeing on employment cost index trends and what we've had in recent years. So that is certainly subject to change, but we wanted to put in a starting point. We've put in estimates for health and dental based on the worst case scenario, an allowance for a 1% increase overall in operating line items, an increase for transfers, which includes funding for the library and the youth center. And at this point, not anticipating any changes in general contingency or capital reserves. So it's about a $710,000 increase in cost for what's essentially just a cost to continue for personnel and other required increases. For personnel requests, we're anticipating that it's going to be challenging to address many personnel requests in 2026 just due to the revenue constraints. It may be possible to look at some limited targeted items, but we're anticipating that the next opportunity to more significantly address staffing will likely be in the 2027 budget, taking advantage of a levy limit adjustment coming from the closure of TIF District number 3. Beyond that, longer-term staffing needs that may be identified in the organizational and staffing study may lead to conversations either about an operating referendum for the levy limit or needing to explore alternative revenue options to the that there are some. Next, getting into the multi-year budget projection. I've outlined some assumptions here, kind of touched on some of these, but we're assuming increases in net new construction, some of our other revenues and expenditure increases based on what we've been seeing for inflation and employment costs. And based on those assumptions for 2026, we've also made some assumptions based on the TID closure for the 2027 budget. And I touched on this in some detail in the previous budget kickoff presentation, but just to recap, we're looking at likely around a 7% levy limit adjustment following that closure. That should give us just over $1 million of additional levy capacity. And I've laid out some initial thoughts of areas where we might want to address as part of that additional levy authority. Includes addressing some things that we need to phase out, such as our abated debt service adjustment. If we do increase interest income in the 2026 budget, we may need to look at scaling that back if interest rates start to come down. There are items that are currently funded in the TIF districts, such as downtown maintenance and GIS, that we would need to incorporate into the budget. And then anticipating if we want to make some operating budget increases, fully fund our general contingency based on our fund balance policy, and then look at what would be left for personnel costs and contingency and staffing, potentially about $500,000 or around half of that dollar amount. So all of that said, that's a lot of assumptions, and I'm trying to lay out a 5-year projection This will change, and we will update this based on new information and throughout the budget process. But if we look at our general fund for where we are in 25 and then projecting out, we do see that there are gaps in each year, including in 2026. So that's part of the work that we'll need to do as staff, as well as this committee and the council, when we get all of the department requests to work to balance the budget. That gap starts relatively small at 150,000, which is less than it's a small percentage of the overall general fund budget. This does show that growing in 2028 and 2029 without some other revenue source in those years. But again, we'll update this based on the plans and discussions as we get into the budget process. Just showing that graphically, we're seeing that the issue is that expenditures based on inflation and inflationary growth and population growth growing faster than revenues. So especially in those out years, starting to see a larger gap starting to develop without making any other changes. So as we look at a high level of kind of a starting point for budget strategies, for 2026, we're anticipating that it would likely be largely a cost to continue budget, try to address the most critical needs, consider the recommendations from the compensation study, and look at making some targeted implementations of that based on the available funds in 2026. In 2027, with the TID 3 closure and the levy limit adjustment, we should have some additional flexibility. That should allow the city to continue to consider anything coming out of the compensation study that's not fully implemented in 2026, and then start to look at that staffing study and highest priority needs for staffing across the community. And then beyond that, as we look at 2028 and beyond, the city may need to look at an operating referendum in the future or look at alternative revenue options unless there are significant changes to the levy limit program at the state. And as we've said each year, the challenge is with levy limits that they don't have an inflationary component. They only look at new construction. So when we're seeing inflation at the levels we're currently at in a growing community with increased service needs and a population that desires a high level of service, it is a challenge each year to balance that without having some other sources of revenue to come in over time. With that, and then I'll try to leave at least a few minutes for questions here. Kind of what the rest of the process looks like. From the kickoff tonight, we're going to be doing a kickoff meeting with staff tomorrow morning. Department budget forms are out and their requests are due in a month. Then administration and finance will be working with the mayor on putting together the proposed budget book to have an executive budget as a starting point. Looking at finance committee meetings on September 30th, October 7th, and October 21st to go through the meetings with departments and work on putting together the budget recommendations. You can schedule additional meetings if needed during that process. And then we'd be looking for a finance committee recommendation around the end of October, if not on October 21st. And then the council making their discussions and deliberations and public hearing on November 4th, with final budget adoption on November 18th. Apologize for the speed going through that, but I wanted to try to at least touch on everything with the time we have, and I'd be happy to answer questions with the remaining time.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Page 19, I think it is. Anyway, the assumed 2% increase in annual property tax growth. The assumptions, budget priority or projection assumptions. So that 2% increase in annual property tax growth compares to 3% this year, and that includes both debt service and the general fund, that new construction, correct?
This slide is only referring to the general fund portion. So for 2026, we have a anticipated net new construction for the general fund of 1.5%. We're anticipating that overall property tax levy, including debt service, would go up about 3%. Going forward, our estimate is that net new construction would increase from the 1.5% to 2%, at least for the next couple of years, based on some of the subdivision activity and things that are being constructed this year that'll be valued as of 1/1/26, and then that's available for the 2027 budget. It's harder to project out beyond a couple years, but at least for the next couple years, we think we may see a little bit higher net new construction.
Okay, that's good to know, because because our trend is going down at
Mhm.
1.8%, but I was wondering, I'd love to see new construction plotted on that same graph, because it seems like there's a lot of construction going
Yeah.
on in my district in particular, and I know the whole problem is that our property value is going up, so we need a bigger building boom to make that. Okay, that's good to know. One of the questions I'll have when we really start getting into the budget is whether our health insurance waiver bonus is making a difference at all in, will opt in for it. I think you guys last year and time where I know how much it was cheaper than itself. So the increase in insurance rates for both city and staff, I know that staff pay for some of the insurance, pay the city pays for the rest. But I'm a little concerned that we'll be eating up some of the small increase in compensation for staff by increasing, what they're going to pay for insurance. So that'll be concerning going forward. The idea of operating referendum in the future, I think that makes sense. I would like to see this committee assess one of the positions that we created after our last operating limit referendum, and that's the communications position. That was in 2022 that we had a successful referendum position created in 23, and I don't think we've had a check-in yet to make sure that council members feel like the value we intended and hoped to have from that position. I think we owe to the voters before we ask them a lot of strings taxes for any new positions. I think we need to look at ones we have created. And then finally, I think I brought this up last year as well. Is there any way, looking at the multi-year projections, is there any way to close that $150,000 hole next year, and 27 by charging for our recycling services? I know we don't have to go to a referendum for that charge. Our current budget has $355,000 in recycling. We phased it in over 2 years. It was I don't consider it very burdensome as it is. It would be about $16 or $17 per household per year, or half of that, 55. So that's just something that I think would be good for us to consider, because we have tried, this bill was noted, there's no inflationary component to our levy limit increases, and so we are just getting blood out of the turnip, squeezing it really tight, and this recycling service fee is one of the last things that I think we have remaining as an option to close some of the gap. Suggestion. Thanks.
Right.
Good. And maybe just one comment. I think one other thing that you talked about too is, that's additions. But are those just for road improvement? Cities can add a fee to the car registration piece. Is that right?
Yeah, so that is a revenue option to look at a wheel tax. There's a lot of flexibility in how you implement that and the level of the fee that you set for that. Usually that has been used for transportation services by the municipalities that have imposed them, but we can provide some additional information on that option.
Yeah, I don't remember that being like.
Yeah, it was, depending on the level of the fee, I think it could generate a few $100,000. So there is that potential. It depends on what the fee level is, but we can provide some updated estimates for that as we get the budget information ready for you.
For agenda items. Bill gave us a list, you can review, as he stated, this is just a tentative list, but it's very consideration. And it's a benefit. If you have any questions, in terms of all about the units. And, have questions. Okay, that. Yeah, fair. Thank you. Motion. Well.
I mean, everything that makes sense, like, really confusing, even for like. I think Randall, was first, I think everything was straightforward and highlighted correctly, so. How do you didn't get off at all? So, yeah,
All right, well, thanks for coming out to me.
I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yes.
And I'll run the checks tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Or then I'll just head back after the meeting.
Okay.
So
Sounds
I'll
good.
do the checks in the morning and make sure that everything's printed,
Mhm.
and get everything in positive pay after that, so.
Okay.
Yeah, have a good evening.
All right, you too.
Have a good evening. See, you wore the correct outfit, shorts.
Oh, I love my.
Oh, that was your bike. I was gonna ride my bike too, cause I only live like 8 minutes away, but.
You drive?
Yeah. Well, I have to pick up some kids
Oh,
right
yeah.
here and
I get
that's so. Fine.
Get a car somewhere.
Well, I've seen different types, have a baby, so she's like 9 months, and then 2-year-old. So, still a little difficult, but I know that they make like basket points. I can put them in a basket.